I'm Kalika Karkar-Sharma. I'm a motion graphics artist and animator here in New York City. I've been doing character animations since the 90s, and then I have been doing motion graphics since, I'd say, about 2003, which is when I started freelance. I've worked at Nickelodeon. I've done stuff for MTV, HBO, PBS. I did some shorts for Sesame Street, things like that. So yeah, I've done quite a bit of motion graphics. My company, Antidote FX, you can check us out at antidotefx.com. We've got a pretty wide variety of work. So I'm here on behalf of Noble Desktop. Noble Desktop is a training center in New York City. We teach people how to design and code. And today, we are going to be animating a logo in After Effects. We'll be preparing it for work in After Effects and Illustrator first, so it helps if you know a little bit about Illustrator, but I don't know that much about Illustrator. I know enough in order to animate the stuff from Illustrator into After Effects. So I'll be going, maybe a little bit slow in Illustrator, but I'll chatter as I do it. So without further ado, let me move on to my other screen here. So we're going to be working with the Noble Desktop logo, a little shameless self-promotion there for us. And this is a CMYK file, and most of our logo files that we design are CMYK because they're intended for print. If you're lucky enough to have an RGB file, that's great. You can skip that spot. But what's going on? Whoops, hold on. I pressed something. There we go. So this is a CMYK file. And the very first thing you do when you have a CMYK file is you're going to want to change that to RGB. And the reason for that is that After Effects works in the RGB color space, which is an additive color space, meaning that if you have more color, it goes toward white. If you have less color, it goes toward black. So you got to go to File menu, Document Color Mode, RGB. And it looks the same because it didn't actually take. Let's do it again. Document Color Mode, RGB. There we go. We are RGB now. Woohoo. Let me check out the size of this artboard. So I'm going to click on the artboard tool, and I can see that my artboard is really small in pixel size. And After Effects only cares about pixel size. It does not care about DPI at all. So I'm going to change the pixel size. So my width is going to be 1920 pixels, and my height is going to be 1080 pixels. And this is going to be huge compared to what I already had. Whoa. Let's zoom out a little bit. Take a look. Holy crow, that is quite big. Alrighty, and I'm going to Command A to select all my layers and just scale that up. Option Shift Scale. Beautiful. I think that's a decent size for my logo. I can dig it. And I'm going to pull up my layers window. So before we create an animation in After Effects, it's a good idea to prepare it in Illustrator first. So let me just...
Is there a reason why you chose that particular size?
Oh, that's a great question, Dan. I'm here with Dan Rodney from Noble Desktop. The reason why I chose 1920 by 1080 is because that is the HD standard. If you were going to do a different setting, like if you were intending to go to a square Instagram setup, then you would simply click on the artboard size and change that to 1080 by 1080, so it would be square. You could go smaller than that if you wanted to as well, but I, just as a matter of habit, create stuff at standard HD 1080p size. Not widescreen, but HD size. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do after I have changed the size is I'm going to ungroup all this stuff and label it. So we have these beautiful layer thumbnails in Illustrator and Photoshop. They're so nice. They actually tell us what's in them. After Effects does not, because After Effects is, in that sense, sort of sort of mean. So I'm going to break this down into further layers, and they have to be legit separate layers. They can't be sub-layers. They can't be groups. They can't be compound paths. Otherwise, it's just going to cause a lot of unnecessary extra steps in After Effects. So let me just start breaking this down. We have a question here. What's the difference between HD and widescreen size? Widescreen size tends to be like CinemaScope, and that is, I don't remember the exact dimensions, but it's, you end up cutting off part of the top and bottom when you do true widescreen. So I'm just going to keep ungrouping these. So Command-Shift-G, and then I have all these paths, Command-Shift-G, 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 and so on. Now, if you have a compound path that you wanted to break up, of course, you would go to Object, Compound Path Release. But we don't have any of that stuff. So here's Desktop, Command-Shift-G, and that is all from here. Ungroup, right? Okay, so we're still not done. We have all of these sub-layers or sub-paths of this main layer. We got to break those down even further so that we have actual separate layers. So I'm going to go to this little drop down right here. I call this the sandwich or the sandwich. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to go to Release to Layers Sequence. I have no idea why it's called that, but that's the one we use. And we end up with all of these sub-layers now. And I'm going to take all of these and release them from the folder structure or release them from the layer structure. Just going to click on that first one, shift-click on the last one, and drag all the way to the bottom and let go, and that releases them. And then I'm left with this lonely layer 1 that has no layer content because he has no little arrow next to him. Okay, so I'm just going to delete him. So let's start labeling this. As I said, After Effects has terrible layer thumbnails. So I'm just going to click on each one of these, and I'm going to name them based on the order that I'm going to animate them. Now, it isn't a good idea to reorder your layers, and the reason for that is that if you reorder your layers, you might change their appearance, and that won't be a good thing. I usually leave my layers in whatever order they were designed in. So that was 1, 2, 3. This is going to be number 4. And if you have any questions, now would be a great time to ask them because I'm just doing something that is totally rote. And we are? Okay, cool. And there we go. There was somebody asked something about Facebook at some point, about optimizing videos for Facebook. I don't remember what that question was, Dan, if you wouldn't mind. And then this last guy is...
My boss today asked me about making short videos to post to Facebook with captions, motion, etc. So I guess an overview.
5, 6.
Yeah, so I just want to know how to make stuff.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, and then... I also like to put, if things aren't overlapping, then I will change the layer order. So I'm going to call this black square, and I'm going to put these layers in the order that I want them to animate, because otherwise it's going to misspell stuff. Just bear with me while I rename these. File size with After Effects Facebook ads. Okay, so file size is a pesky thing because what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the best quality and the lowest file size, which can be really difficult. So the things that control file size are frame rate. If you have a higher frame rate, you're going to end up with bigger files. If you have a lower frame rate, smaller files. Let's see, what else affects it? Your bit rate, the number of keyframes. So I have a few tricks up my sleeve when it comes to reducing file size. There's this great third-party app out there called Handbrake. And Handbrake is pretty great because has some amazing algorithm that manages to shrink your videos down to a very, very manageable file size. Aside from that, it does take a bit of trial and error to try to get your MP4s down to a decent size. Again, you want to play with your bit rate primarily. I usually try not to go below an 8 Mbps bit rate. To answer Paul's question, Paul had asked, are you renaming your layers so you can make it easier to understand what you're seeing visually? Yes, that's the main reason why I am renaming my layers, because when I import this file into After Effects, I'm not going to have these beautiful layer thumbnails that I have in Illustrator. It's just going to be a generalized Adobe Illustrator, like this terrible logo up here. You know, I mean terrible because the AI logo doesn't really tell you that much about what you're looking at. So, all right. Any other questions before we move on? All right. Sweet. So I'm going to save this out, save as, and I'm going to save this into my folder for the Noble logo animation. So I've made this folder here, and it's got 3 main folders in it, and this output folder has 2 within that. So because it's going to be imported into After Effects, I'm saving it into AE assets, and I'm going to call it Noble Logo HD RGB because that's what it is. And I'm going to hit OK, save, Illustrator CC, and so on. That should be fine. The defaults are fine for that. And just make sure that all of your layers are actual layers. So when you twirl close these little triangles, you should have multiple layers going on. All right, cool. So now that that's done, I can go to After Effects. And here is After Effects, and we have our trusty Start menu, and I'm just going to say New Project. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is make what I call a dummy comp. And a dummy comp just ensures that whatever you import as a layered file is going to come in at the proper duration. So, and by duration, I mean length of time, and also the right frame rate, because you don't want to have some funky frame rate that is at odds with what your final output is. And we're going to pretend that this particular composition, this particular animation, is being done for HD television. So we're going to a television station with this. So composition, new composition. And in the composition settings, I'm going to change a couple of things. So where it says preset, I'm going to change that to the very last HD TV preset here. That auto-populates everything in the top part of the composition settings window. I also want the start time code to be 0. And I want it to be 5 seconds long. So if your time code shows up like this with little semicolons, that means that it's drop frame. It's 29.97 drop frame, which is the broadcast standard. Essentially means that it's dropping a few frames every like 10 minutes or so, or every minute. The important thing to remember is that if your work is going to an editor, or if your work is going to a network or to another person, basically, make sure that you're all working with the same settings. Otherwise, you will have problems in terms of syncing up audio and picture sometimes, or they'll tell you to make a 10-second animation. If it's at the wrong frame rate, it may not fill that full 10 seconds. So ask this question about frame rate before you begin. The duration I want is 5 seconds, but this time code thing can be a little bit confusing for folks, so I'm going to do a little trick to make it not be so confusing. So 5 seconds and 0 frames, and then I'm going to hit OK. And then right here is my dummy comp's time code. And if I hold the Command key down on a Mac or the Control key down on a PC and I click that, it changes to frames. And if you're not so good at math, that's all right. All you have to do is go back to your composition settings and make sure that your start frame is set to 0 and your duration is 150. Okay? We're just going to hit OK to that. And the reason I didn't name it, the reason I didn't change the background color is that it's just a dummy comp. I'm just using it for its settings, and then I can just discard it. This way, when I import my file, it's going to come in at the proper settings. So I'm going to go File, Import, File, and I'm going to go to my AE Assets and double click this file in order to get its options. If you don't double click it, it just brings it in the way that the defaults are set in the preferences, and we don't want to do that. So I double click it, double click, there we go, and it brings up this options window. Okay, so import kind, footage, no, because we don't want just one of the layers. We don't want to bring it in as a merged file. We want it as a composition with all of its layers intact and everything separated out the way that we had done it in Illustrator. In addition, we want the footage dimensions to be layer size. This is what I choose whenever I have final art where the layer dimensions are not going to change anymore. If I'm not sure whether the layer dimensions might change, in that case I would choose document size. Now, document size is a little bit more complicated to animate because your layer handles end up being the same dimensions as your entire document. And I'll show you that in a moment. But let's just choose layer size for the first one. There we go. And I'm going to double click that composition to load it into the composition viewer and the timeline. Okay, so down here we have our zoom area, and I'm going to change that to fit. And we can see right away that our background is the absolute wrong color. So I'm going to go to Composition, Settings, and I'm going to change the background color to white. Okay? All right. Now, what we're looking at here is the After Effects interface, and it's a little different than Photoshop and Illustrator and even Premiere. It takes cues from both of them. It's kind of like when you meet an interesting puppy, and the puppy's mother is beautiful and the puppy's father is beautiful, but the puppy, it's just really funky looking. Bear with me. The analogy gets worse. So this funky looking puppy has a lot of great attributes to him. He can fly, he poops gold, just really amazing things to him. But there are some idiosyncrasies that you kind of have to get used to. His mouth is not on his face. A lot of really crazy things are going on with this puppy, and that is After Effects. This is this funky program that can do great things, but you have to kind of wrap your mind around its idiosyncrasies, shall we say. Okay, so for one, its toolbox is up at the top. Dude, all right. Then we've got our project window, which is sort of like Premiere or one of those editing programs where we've got our, list of sequences and things that we've imported. And it's also sort of a know-it-all. So if you click on anything within this project window, it's going to tell you all about it in the upper left corner in this little thumbnail view. So it says that this composition is 1920 by 1080 pixels, it's 150 frames, and it's 29.97 frames per second. That's pretty great. When I click on each of these layers, notice that the bounding box or the handles around each layer are confined to the layer themselves. That's also very handy for animation. Now, what if your logo isn't final, but you still have to animate it? Well, you can still work with it. I've had it happen before where I was called in to animate, it was a new credit card product, and they hadn't figured out a name for it yet, but they still needed to have the promo worked on over the weekend. So what we did was we imported it a slightly different way. We went import file, and we knew that certain things about the logo were going to stay the same. So maybe the box was going to stay the same, but the name might change. So we chose import kind composition, footage dimensions, document size. Now the advantage of doing it that way is that when we double click on it and of course change our background color to white. Yeah, I know, I was working on the weekend on that project, but they doubled my rate, so I was happy. All right, here is the logo with document sized handles. And it's hard to tell what you're selected on because when you solo a layer, Now you can see, yes, this is layer N, but the handles for it are taking up the entire window. But this comes really handy. Like if they changed this to bubble desktop, then we could add an extra couple letters and it wouldn't throw everything else off of registration. So that's document size import. I'm just going to undo a couple of these and undo import. We're back to our layer size composition handles. Okay, so yes, to answer a question that was asked earlier, why was this done in Illustrator? Most of the time, in my experience, the logo designs that I get are Illustrator files, and that's why I used Illustrator for this example. Also, the advantage of designing your logo in Illustrator is that it's vector, which means that it can be as big as the side of a bus or the side of a building, or it can be as small as your business card, and you won't lose any resolution either way. Okay, so something funky, I know, funky puppy, something funky about After Effects is that it does not recognize that a file is vector unless you tell it. It's like that person you dated way back when who had to be reminded of everything. Like, hey, don't forget your wallet. Hey, don't forget your shoes. Yeah, it's that person. So if I go into my layers transform properties right here and I just increase the scale and I increase the scale. Ugh, look at those gnarly edges. Not cool. Well, it's because we haven't told After Effects, hey dude, this is a vector. And this button right here between the shy guy and the slash is it's called the continuously rasterize button. I call it the Sunburst because it kind of looks like that. Sunburst, you know, the off-brand Starburst candy competitor. If you're not seeing this Sunburst little icon, you might need to press this button down here. I know it doesn't look like it's a button, but it is. The toggle switches and modes will bring up the little shy guy and the slash. And just make sure that all of your layers that are at 100% and that all of these continuously rasterized buttons are turned on. Now, you're not going to get these buttons if the layer isn't vector or if you're working with Photoshop files. You're just not going to have that. But that is one of the advantages of Illustrator and working with vectors is that they are resolution independent, meaning that you can make it as big as you want and you won't lose resolution. As long as you remind this funky puppy that yes, indeed, it is a vector. Alrighty. So we have our timeline down here. This is where all the animation happens. This is where you'll see your keyframes. This is a lot like your layer window when you're in Photoshop or Illustrator. This is a lot like your timeline when you're in Premiere. However, the key difference between this and Premiere is that you can't have more than one piece of artwork on a layer. So if you wanted the word noble to show up first and then the word desktop, you could do something like this, where you shorten the layers. See how I'm like hovering over the end of the layer? I hold the shift key down. But you can't drag these clips to exist on the same plane as these other clips. In that sense, they act much more like layers than they act like video tracks. It's weird. Funky puppy, once again. So now we can have our noble followed by our desktop just by having shortened the layers, which can be really hairy. I mean, you're looking at this and you're like, dude, where's the folders? I should really have folders for these. No, they don't have folders. So what I do instead is I color code, and it just makes it a lot easier to know what I'm looking at and how I'm planning on using it. So I'm going to select all of my numbered layers here, and color coding them doesn't change what they look like up here. It's just like Illustrator or Photoshop where you can color code. It's just for our own reference. And there's this label color column right here. It looks like a little luggage tag. You're going to click on that and change that to yellow for all these guys. Then I've got my black square. That's an important one. I'm going to make that one fuchsia. And see, it's even that's funny. Like it tells you the names of the colors. It doesn't actually show you the colors. And then the next group is going to be blue. Yeah. So blue, and then I'll leave desktop alone. Sweet. All right. So if you guys have any questions, it'd be a good time to ask. All right. Cool. So as I said, this is our timeline where we have all of our keyframes and all of our layers. This is our composition view. And in our composition viewer, or some people call it the comp panel, you can animate interactively. Now, unlike Photoshop and Illustrator, where you have a lot of like all-in-one tools, here there's a little bit more of a division of labor. So the selection tool is great for like moving things or for scaling things. Wait, what? But you can't hold the shift key down while you scale, because if you hold the shift key, After Effects thinks that you're deselecting. Funky puppy. So in order to scale, what I suggest is that you swivel open your transforms on the layer in the timeline, just a little bit different way of working, and simply drag with the pointer finger the scale larger. Now, if you're used to pulling things interactively, you're not completely out of luck. What you would do is you would pull the corner, hold the shift key down, and drag. So you pull the corner first, then hold the shift key. Yeah, kind of weird. Because you have to indicate that, yes, I intend to scale this, and then hold shift to keep it at the proportional scale. Okay, so again, the selection tool controls position and scale. Hand tool, just like Photoshop, just like Illustrator, you're basically just moving your artwork around on your desk. Zoom tool, you're bringing the artwork closer to your face. That's about it. I prefer to use this area here in the comp panel where it has a zoom amount, and I usually set it to fit. There was a question, this is sort of like Flash. When it comes to the timeline or when it comes to the scaling? I'm not quite sure what the question is. If you could clarify that, that would be really helpful. All right, so yeah, zoom tool, I prefer to use the fit. This guy is the rotation tool. So the rotation tool, it only controls rotation. Yeah, kind of weird. So that's the rotation property. And then we've got the anchor point tool or pan behind tool, and this is for changing the pivot. So by default, the pivot is in the center of the timeline of the layer, and so it's spinning like that. But if I move the pivot somewhere else, then that becomes the point from which it rotates or the point from which it scales. Whoops, that guy is right there. Let's just swivel open. So to answer that question again, I got a little bit of clarification on that. Is this more like Flash? No, actually, because in Flash, you can have more than one thing on a layer. You can have more than one thing in a keyframe. This is just a very strange combination of working in Premiere and working in Photoshop layers, not the Photoshop timeline. But you get used to it soon enough, trust me. Okay, so we've labeled everything, we've turned everything to continuously rasterize, and the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to animate the black square. And let me just undo, there we go. So I want to animate the black square, I want it to scale up and then have these things sort of pop up around. So I want to isolate just the black square. And one nice thing here is that we can actually click on this little empty square next to the eyeball area, and that's solo. And that just shows you that one layer, nothing else. Okay, so I'm going to keyframe the scale property. I'm going to swivel open this black square layer, and each layer comes with a set of transforms: the anchor point, the position, the scale, the rotation, and the opacity. And each of these things, basically anything in After Effects that has a stopwatch, can be animated. So in order to animate something, you need at least 2 keyframes. You need a constant and you need a change. And it needs to happen within one of those properties. So if I have a keyframe on scale, which to turn on the keyframe ability of something, you have to turn on the stopwatch. Then you go later in time and you're like, oh, no, keyframe opacity. That's not going to make animation because we're talking about 2 different things. But if you set a keyframe on scale at one point and then you go later in time and you change the scale value, you'll see that animate. So again, in order to create animation, all you need to do is turn on the stopwatch. Maybe you'll change the value, maybe not. Go later in time and then change the value. Notice I didn't hit the stopwatch again. And some of you might be curious to know what happens when you do. When you click the stopwatch again, all the animation goes away, which can be really cathartic if you hate your animation. If you're just like, oh my gosh, this is the worst animation anyone's ever seen before. I hope nobody walks by my desk while I'm working on this. Then you just click your stopwatches and turn everything off. But you really only want to turn on that scale stopwatch or whatever stopwatch one time to enable animation and to basically fix a particular value to a specific point in time. So we're going to animate the scale of this black square coming up from nothing. We're going to start off with the scale at 0, which means it is invisible. Ooh, it's going to be magic. Watch. So it's going to be 0% there, and then 10 frames later, I'm just going to type in 10, it's going to be 100%. And we're going to watch this, and you're going to be totally bored. Yeah, see, that's not so exciting. Let's make it more exciting. So animation, motion graphics takes cues from a lot of different places, okay? Where are we? I'm trying to figure out, there we go. This one. Yeah, okay. So, hi again. Animation takes its cues from a lot of different places. It takes its cues from motion graphics takes its cues from animation, from filmmaking, takes cues from graphic design, from typography, from editing. One of the main places it takes its inspiration, though, is through animation. So we're going to use an animation principle called exaggeration and overshoot in order to get this to go past its destination and then settle back to where we want it to go. So this box is so excited. It's going to get bigger than it needs to, and then it's going to shrink down a little bit. So right here, my scale is going to be 120. Okay, it's going to be quite a bit bigger. And then at 14 frames, just clicking the time code and typing 14, or I can take this, they call this the current time indicator or the playhead. You can just drag that instead, taking that to 14 frames, and I'm going to set that to 100. And let's play that back. The first time it plays is kind of a joke because it's loading all of the data into the computer, but that feels pretty good. Yeah, we could totally add sound to this if we wanted to. We don't have sound with us today, but yeah, After Effects does a great job of allowing you to sync up sound and picture. Okay, so here's our black square. I'm just going to give this a little extra oomph and have it hang out at this larger size for just a hair of time before it settles back down. So I'm going to go to the animation menu, keyframe assistant, and add an easy ease. And that is just going to have it like hang out there before it comes back down. Boing, boing. So whenever you animate something in After Effects or any other program for that matter, remember this: good animation feels good. So it's not about like, oh, I think it looks good. No, it feels good. So if it feels good, it is good. So this feels good, so I'm going to move on to the next thing I want to animate. So I am going to animate all of the numbered squares, okay? Here's my numbered squares. And they are going to animate after the black square has come up. So they're going to start right at 14 frames. And they are also going to animate in scale. Notice I have them all selected. I clicked on one and shift-clicked the last one. And because they were all yellow, it made it really easy for me at a glance to know which one to choose. So I turn on the scale stopwatch, change the scale value to 0. Also, because we're not seeing anything happening at the beginning here, I'm going to shorten the beginning. In After Effects, to snap to the playhead, you can hold the Shift key down. So it just sort of feels like it snaps in there. Okay, so they're all at 0% at 14 frames. And then at 20 frames, I'm going to scale that up. 20 frames, it's going to be, once again, 120. So they go past their destination. And then at 24 frames, I'm going to go back down to 100. Okay, and when we play this back, yeah, it's all right, but it'd be cooler if it drew on. So let's do that. First, I'm going to take all these middle guys, the overshoot keyframes, where it was like, I'm so excited, I'm getting too big. And I'm going to change those to easy ease. So keyframe assistant easy ease. And then I'm going to sequence them, okay? So I'm going to offset the timings a little bit. The very first one is going to start where it starts, and then I'm going to take the rest of them and move them, okay? So I'm going to select all these keyframes by drawing a big box around everybody. And then I'm going to command click on the layer named 01. Notice I am not referring to the layers by the number. I'm referring to them by their number order that I gave them in Illustrator. And I'm just going to take these guys and move them by 1 frame. So it's hard sometimes to do it like this. So I'm going to right click here, go to columns, and go to in. This way I know exactly how much I'm moving these guys. So all of these are going to be offset by 1 frame at first, and then they're going to be offset by 2 frames and then by 3 frames. So to answer, there was a question about easing. Easing basically just means that you're slowing into something or slowing out of something. All right, so there's just moving the entire layer bar. Notice when you move the entire layer bar, the keyframes move with it, which is pretty spiffy. And I'm scrolling down. And let's see, I think that's it. 17, 18. There we go. So I'm just offsetting them by 1 frame each. Yeah, that's good. Dan said, easing is like slowing down a horse. Go easy, boy. That's good. All right, so that one is at 18, and then 6 is going to be at 20, and then 7 is going to be at 23. So it's slowing down over time. This is like kind of more of a physical ease as opposed to having the keyframe ease. So the layers themselves are going to be slower toward the end. Oh, it's going to feel so good. Oh, it's beautiful. Look at that. It's so cute. All right, so we're ready to move on to the next thing. I hope that made sense. Everything kind of offset. And again, when you move the layer bar, and notice how I'm moving it from inside the layer. It gives you this little ribbed, grippy thing. It moves the keyframes with it. Whereas if you're moving the end of the layer, it's simply extending the beginning or the end of the layer, so it lasts longer on screen. Okay, so now I'm going to animate the text. And I'm going to start that animation at 32 frames. Alrighty, so let's grab all of these layers. And I'm going to hit P for position because these are all going to leap up in position. I like this lockup. Matter of fact, Noble Desktop likes this lockup. They spent time, effort, money, energy in getting this lockup the way that they wanted it. And who am I to screw it up? So I should probably end up at this lockup, right? So I'm going to go forward in time to the last frame of this animation, and that's what I'm going to keyframe. So sometimes it's easier to animate backwards than it is to animate forwards. So we're going to animate into this position, okay? So I'm going to turn on the position stopwatch next to all of these letters. Now, scale is probably familiar to you guys because scale is a story that's told in percentage of original, both horizontal and vertical. But position is told in terms of a little bit of math here, X and Y. Okay, now what X and Y? Well, see this little guy, this little pivot thingy? That's your anchor point. And position counts from the upper left corner here. And if we show our info window, you'll see it really good. See that? That is 0, 0, way up here in the corner. And as I go down and to the right, both X and Y increase. So wherever this anchor point is in relationship to the entire composition, that is your position for each layer. Well, then what's this anchor point business? Well, the anchor point is based on the layer size. So the anchor point is all about where this thing is, if I just zoom in a heck of a lot, where this thing is in relationship to the layer, with 0, 0 being up here, okay? All right, so enough nerding out about math. Suffice it to say, we have keyframed all of these layers, meaning we have fixed, yes, that's in pixels, absolutely. We have fixed all of these layers' position at this point in time. This point in time being 47 frames, which is about 1.5 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to animate backwards, going to 42. And these letters are really excited too. I mean, why not? So they are going to move up. And I want them to move up by 80 pixels. I know that because I've animated this before. So 80 pixels, if I'm just going to pay attention to one of these because otherwise I'll lose my mind. Let's find one that's got nice round numbers to work with. How about this one? Where was it? There was something that had a 30 in it. Yeah. So 830 minus 80 is going to be 750. Okay. So I'm just looking at this number here, 830.9. And I can use my arrow keys, shift and arrow up until I get, and then use just the arrow down until I get close to 750 on that guy. So if I go to my preview window, the preview window controls your playback. And I want this to play my work area. So see this little gray bar? This is my work area. I'm just going to pull that blue thing out. I'm going to pull this side blue thing in. And I'm going to have it play from current time. I can either hit this play button here or the space bar. All right, so now they're coming from the top, but what I really want is for them to come from the bottom. So I'm going to go back even further in time to 32. Okay, move that playhead to 32. And I want to move these guys below title safety. What's title safety about? Let's just pull this thing up. This is my title and action safe grid. Basically, for HD broadcast, you want to stay within this second line for all of your legible text. So we want to pull this down below that. Yeah, that should be pretty good. All right, and I'm going to pull this open a little bit.
Is that because outside of that it might actually get cut off on some TVs?
Yes, it might get cut off, but we're also going to be doing a little bit of magic ourselves and add like a little white bar to cover it up so that it's going to jump up from nothing. But this is just sort of a nice I noticed that this was a nice place for it to come up from. Was about 20% out of the frame. Yeah. So pressing spacebar. And let's give it a little easy ease on this top guy. So a quick way to give it an easy ease is to control click on the keyframes. Go to Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. And
if you're on Windows, that would be a right click, right?
Yep, absolutely. That would be a right click on Windows. It would be a control click on Mac. All right, so that feels good. And as I mentioned before, we are going to hide this part of the text, so don't worry about it. But we also want to shorten all these guys so that they are going to start at that point in time. So again, to shorten, hover over the end of a layer. You get this double-ended arrow. Hold Shift, and it'll snap to wherever your playhead is. Okay, so I want to offset all of these letters by one frame. And I've got a really cool trick to do that because I don't feel like offsetting, like 10 layers or whatever by one frame each, because that's pretty time consuming. So what I do is I shorten everything to only last one frame, and then I'm going to offset each of those frames by that duration. And After Effects allows me to kind of automate that. So I'm going to drag the end part all the way over so that my layers only last one frame. Let's see. In point 32 and yeah, so I shortened all those to one layer, one frame, and then I'm going to sequence them. Now this happens in the order that you select. So if you select all these layers from top and then Shift select the bottom, it's going to put them in that order. So I'm going to go to Animation, Keyframe Assistant. I know they're not keyframes, they're layers, but bear with me. We're going to use Sequence Layers. And it's going to put them in order based on how long they are. Okay, no overlap. Okay, and then I'm going to extend them because otherwise I'm going to see them each for only one frame. That's not cool. So let's just drag these guys so that they last the duration of my animation. And what I end up with is this. That's pretty cute. I like it. Okay, so again, the way that I did it, I shortened everything to last one frame. So shorten the beginning with the holding the Shift key down, shorten the end, and then Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers. No overlap, hit OK, and then extend the end to the end. Now, we can play with the timing a little bit further here just by messing with the in column. And you can type in values into the in column as well. So it's going to go 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39. And then maybe these guys for after we get DES in there, we'll offset these guys a little bit more. So if I type in 41, the entire layer shoves over a little bit, which is kind of nice. And this one's going to be 45. Yeah, that's good. And then this last guy is going to be 48. Yeah, he's a straggler. He's 3 whole frames behind the rest of his friends. Okay. Cute. I love it. All right, so oh, snap. We crashed. All right, users Dan's document. Okay. Take a deep breath. Users Dan. Documents. Bear with me, guys. Sorry. After Effects crash. Let's just hope that works. Let's see. Oh my goodness. Thank you, After Effects. Let me save this. Whew, that was a close one. Yeah. Fortunately, I'm not selling the software. I'm just selling the class. So, all right, we're going to go to Desktop After Effects Projects. Let's save that bad boy. Mobile Desktop. I know, it's such a funky puppy. All right.
At least it recovered.
I know. I could redo this in a couple minutes, but still. Save early and save often. I know, Poison Fists. That's the truth. Okay, so I got really lucky. All right, so all these guys, they just kind of pop on, which I'm not crazy about. Like letter D is just like bloop, and that looks kind of silly. So I'm gonna crop it. Now you might be thinking, yeah, well, it's all white. Just put a white bar on top. Well, what if my client decides that I really want to have like a vignette on top? Then I'm gonna be out of luck. Or if they wanted like a textured background all of a sudden. I want this to be able to work on any kind of background. So let's do a little After Effects style grouping. Of course it has a different name. Why would it have the same name? It's a funky, funky thing. So I'm selecting all those layers, right? And then I'm going to go to the layer menu and I'm going to choose pre-compose. So pre-composing is kind of like putting all your animated layers into a clear envelope. Okay? You can still see them all moving and dancing and animating. And then you can open the envelope and you can change things around. But it makes it a little easier to move it around within the main composition when you have it pre-composed like that or grouped like that. And it also allows you to crop it using our shape drawing tools. So let's do that. I'm going to choose pre-compose, and I'm going to call this thing text underscore PC for pre-composition. I want to adjust the composition duration to the time span of the selected layers. I don't want to open the new comp. I think that's all right. But this adjust comp duration to the time span is pretty clever. I'll show you. So now, if I double click this text PC, notice it starts at frame 32. Huh. The text PC layer starts at frame 32. Huh. Pretty spectacular. And if I double click on it at any point, look at that. I get to the same point in time. Looks the same, except it's just the text. Ooh. So we're going to crop this so that it only starts to kind of show up at a certain point. So if you're used to working with Premiere, this is kind of like a subclip. But yeah, otherwise it's more like a group. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to crop the animation so it's just below the Noble logo. I'm going to use the rectangle tool right here. And when a layer is selected and I use the rectangle tool, it creates what's called a mask. And a mask is basically a way of showing or hiding part of a layer. It's sort of like a layer. It's like a vector mask when you're in Photoshop, or like if you're used to an editing program, it's like a matte. But yeah, I'm gonna create this mask at the bottom of this, and I want it to extend down, maybe like, how about like that? I think that should be good. And I want to pull it up a little bit. But it's already drawn. How do I change it? Double click one point and you get transform controls. Thank goodness. I can just drag one edge up a little bit higher. Now, if I didn't have something selected and I used one of these shape drawing tools, look what happens. Yeesh. That's called a shape layer, and we're not using those. We just want to isolate that one little part of our text. Now, if you're looking at this and you're like, oh, my mask looks terrible, you can click on the mask name and hit delete, or you can go up to the layer menu and choose mask, remove all masks. Pretty handy. Okay. So now, oh my gosh, it's coming up from an invisible line. How incredible is that? Awesome. Okay. So, are there any questions? Please go ahead and chat that if you're with us live. All right. So, oh, yeah, that would be nice. How do we do this now? I'd really like to get this icon to just bounce up a little bit. When the text comes up, I want it to kind of shove up into this place. How do I do that? Well, here's a way. If you have a bunch of stuff that's already been animated and you don't want to pre-compose it necessarily, you can use something called parenting. Now, parenting basically involves taking all of your layers and signing them up, not signing them up, like you're assigning them a common point of reference. So I'm going to take my topmost layer here and then go to the layer menu and choose New Null Object. And the null object, I'm going to place it a little bit more strategically. So I'm going to take that selection tool and I'm going to move it into the middle here. Yeah, that's good. And this guy, I'm going to call it Icon Mover, just so that I remember what I'm working on. This is even if I'm not working with other people, folks, because if I abandon a project for a couple days and come back to it, I have no idea what I'm looking at unless it's properly named. So it just helps me to have things named and labeled so that way I can just hit the ground running when I reopen a project I've been away from. So here's my icon mover, right? So I moved it into place. Notice it has an anchor point right here. Notice it's a box. It has no primary visibility, meaning when you export this as a QuickTime movie, you're not going to see it. It's kind of like an imaginary friend who helps you do chores around the house. Wouldn't that be great? I told you this is a magical, funky puppy. So I'm going to take all of these layers that belong to the icon, and I'm going to do this after they've already animated on. I'm going to parent them to the icon mover. Now to parent, you need the parent column up, and you can bring up the parent column if it isn't showing up by right-clicking or control-clicking where it says layer name or source name, going to columns and choosing parent. And then you can either set where it says none to your icon mover, or you can use this handy pick whip that looks like a part of the inner ear. Just drag that over like this. Yes, it is very much like a child tied to its parent by a leash in the mall. But the child can only inherit specific traits from the parent. If the parent moves, the child moves. If the parent scales, the child scales. If the parent rotates, the child rotates, or the children rotate. If the parent disappears or appears, nothing happens to the children. If you add an effect to the parent, nothing happens to the children, okay? So only position, scale, and rotation transfer over to the child layers. If you want opacity and effects, that's when you pre-compose. But here, we just want it to inherit the position. So we're in the clear. All right, so we want this to end up at this point in time, or around this point in time, right here, okay? So, let's see. Where do I want it to be? All right, so at 54 is where I want it to end up here. So I'm going to keyframe the position property. And if you've noticed that I only had one of the property names open at a time, that's because I don't like looking at all of them, and the hotkeys are really simple for the transforms. They correspond to the acronym PARTS: position, anchor point, rotation, opacity, and scale. So PARTS, And if I just hit the letter corresponding to that property, P for position, let's say, only that one property shows up. Okay, so at 54, I want the position to be where it's at. And I'm going to go back about 4 frames or so, and that's going to be my overshoot. Once again, this thing is so excited, it's going to go past its destination a little bit. And then it's going to go earlier to, maybe let's try 42. I don't want it to be too anticipatory. Let's see. Yeah, maybe right here, 45 feels good. I'm just going to push it down. So it's going to start there. That doesn't feel so good. That's not moving enough at all. I want it to move more. So I want both of these keyframes to move up. I'm going to select both of those, and I'm going to use my arrow keys. With my playhead parked on one of them, I can move them both. Okay, let's play that back. Oh, whoops, I shouldn't have done that because I liked the last position it was in. I wanted it to end up there. That was my lockup. Why didn't anyone correct me? All right, so I need this first one to be down further. So let's move that down further. That feels a little bit better. And I can move just this overshoot keyframe so it like really overshoots. It's like so super excited. And I'm going to move this one a little earlier, and I'm going to move these a little later. Let's see. And let's give this an easy ease. Keyframe assist, easy ease. And let's move that out a couple frames too. Yeah, I will, they call this massaging your keyframes. I can massage my keyframes until I'm blue in the face. Let's see the whole thing all put together, shall we? I'm going to move that in point for the work area all the way open. See this little brackety thing? And make sure that I'm seeing my whole timeline. This is my zoom slider all the way at the bottom here. So I'm just going to move that all the way over so I see the whole thing. And rewind. Go to my preview window. You can rewind that way instead. Play from start of range, why not? And play it back. I think that feels pretty good. So, you know, as I said, I could massage this until I'm blue in the face, and I think I'm going to. Just one more thing. Let me just move that down a little bit more. And a little earlier. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Much better. So if I'm digging that, what I can do is I can export this. So, let's see. If I missed anything, Dan?
No.
Seems all right? Okay. So we're done with the animation, but we got to get it out of After Effects. We have to export it out of the program. So I'm going to go to File menu. I'm going to go to Export, and I'm going to choose Add to Render Queue. Now the render queue is basically like a lineup of where you can export your files. And we need to change some settings here. The default settings are kind of huge. They're not terrible. They look great, but they're huge. We want smaller files. So I'm going to choose, instead of lossless, let's click on that. I can go to Format QuickTime. That's good. Click on Format Options. Bring up my QuickTime Options window. And I can change this video codec. Now, After Effects isn't amazing at compressing video, I'm not going to lie. So I usually export a high quality QuickTime, and then I compress it down further using either Media Encoder or Handbrake, which is another great program for shrinking videos down. Some people swear by MPEG Streamclip. In a pinch, you can use QuickTime. QuickTime works great. Apple ProRes 422 is the one that I would use on Apple. If you are on a PC, you should use the DNX HD codec, which is available from the Avid website for free. It's amazing. It's cross-platform, it's high quality. When you compress it into a zip file, it actually ends up being smaller and then it uncompresses bigger. It's fantastic. But since we're on a Mac today, I'm going to use Apple ProRes 422 because it's the one that I like. And I'm simply going to hit OK. There's no audio, so I'm going to say audio output off, and I'm going to hit OK to that. I'm going to click on the output to area. I'm going to tell it not to save it in a subfolder. That's crazy. And I'm going to go desktop high res from my output. And I'm going to call this Noble Logo Animated. Ooh. Okay, so that's going to export a QuickTime to that folder. Okay, now the reason we didn't see it animating on screen here was because I had the caps lock key on. That makes it go a little faster. Okay, so here is my desktop and output, high res, and if I'm on a Mac, I can open a ProRes file in QuickTime, no problem. If you're on a PC, you can use VLC. That works great. Handbrake is also cross-platform, which is nice. So I'm going to go to File, Export, and this is totally going to seem like I'm dumbing it down, but I'm really not, I swear. iPad. Really, seriously, this is what I use for my clients. And I'm going to choose the middle option. It gives you a nice small 720p compressed file that is suitable for emailing. It comes out great. And I can go to my desktop, I can go to web folder and save it out. M4V is simply the Apple MPEG format. I'm going to hit save. And it should be done. So let me see, web. Let me go full frame here. Let me give it a loop. View, loop. There we go. Just so we can get the play bar off this thing. There we go. Pretty good. And it loops forever. Okay. So that is basically how you would animate a logo in After Effects, starting from Illustrator, going to After Effects, ending up in QuickTime. If you have any questions, those of you who are attending live, please feel free to ask in the chat box, and I'll do my best to answer. There we go. Here we are with our After Effects training page. So Noble Desktop offers 3 different After Effects classes right now. And these classes can be done in person or online. After Effects in a Day is brand new. It's super exciting. It's basically like a primer on the software that takes you through, working with layered files, working with video, creating GIFs, and you get really comfortable with the user interface, animating with keyframes, and working with the timeline, like just really fast in one single day. And the really cool part about this is that if you like the After Effects in a Day, if you take the After Effects in a Day just to see if you like it and you're like, I love this, I should have taken After Effects 1, you can. And what we'll do is we will apply the cost of After Effects in a Day to your tuition for After Effects 1. So After Effects 1 is a 3-day course, or you can take it over the course of 6 evenings. The 6 evenings are usually Mondays and Wednesdays, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. And that class, it's been completely revamped over the past year. It's a lot of real world examples that you would see on Facebook, that you would see in elevators, that you would see on television. We even animate the HBO show open. Where is it? There it is. The HBO show open, not with 50 panels, but with 16. And in doing so, we get really comfortable with working with layered files. Now, if you're already pretty comfortable with the After Effects software and you just want to kick up your learning another notch, you can try After Effects Level 2. And with After Effects Level 2, we spend a lot of time with motion graphics. We work with text animation that's sunk up to audio. We work with vector art, what's it called? Scripts, sorry, 3D text, and we get into digital compositing. So green screen removal, motion tracking, attaching a cell phone screen to a cell phone, animating lower thirds, removing logos. This guy had a logo on his shirt that wasn't T-Mobile, so we took it off. And animating more motion graphics using some really great, cutting-edge, fast tricks that you can take with you. Now, what if you aren't in New York? Well, we also offer an online version, which you would basically be sitting at your desk while we have the class in New York, and you can ask your questions. You'll see a live stream of what I'm doing on my computer. I can switch to your computer if you're having technical issues. So you kind of get the best of both worlds of being where you are, but still being able to take the class. Now, it might be that for whatever reason, you'd rather do it on your own. We also have the books. So the After Effects Level 1 book is available on the Noble Desktop site. You can get it as an ebook, a print copy, or you can get both. I would actually recommend both because the ebook is full color and searchable, whereas the print book is just nice to have next to you while you're working. Usually that's how I kind of do things when I'm working with After Effects training books like of this nature. And that the After Effects 2 book is currently, it's done. We just are putting the final touches on it, and then it'll go to press, and then that will also be available on the website. If you have any questions at all, I'm happy to answer them if you're attending the live stream. I'll stick around for another couple minutes if you have any other questions. Thanks so much for coming. Please like the video and subscribe to our channel. Check out our After Effects classes and workbooks at www.nobledesktop.com.